What happens when the longest reigning queen pulls an Irish goodbye on history? Boom! 1901. Victoria's gone and Britain faceplants into the 20th century. Playboy King? Check. Street fighting suffragettes? Check. A country detoxing from corsets, coal smoke and empire pride? Double check. This is post-Victorian Britain. Panic, pomade and political plot twists. Stay to the end. The finale flips the script on Britain's future. Number 10. The Playboy King. Queen Victoria dies in 1901, and in walks her son Edward VII, a 59-year-old man who had been waiting longer than some people wait for a table at Olive Garden. The public called him the Playboy King because he loved gambling, smoking and affairs with actresses. Basically, he was a Victorian tabloid headline come to life. But to everyone's surprise, Edward turned out to be a capable monarch. He modernized the monarchy, improved foreign relations, and threw parties so extravagant they made Netflix's The Crown look like a school play. Edward gave Britain glamour, but beneath the sparkle, the empire itself was starting to crack. Number 9. Cracks in the empire. At Victoria's death, Britain controlled a quarter of the world's land. 1 out of every 4 places on Earth technically answered to London. But colonies weren't thrilled. India was restless, Ireland demanded independence, and South Africa had just finished the brutal Boer War. England strutted into the 20th century like it was still the global boss. But behind the scenes, the empire looked more like a Jenga tower missing half its blocks. And if the empire was unstable abroad, things weren't much better at home. Number 8. Workers fight back. The Industrial Revolution had given Britain trains, factories and smog thick enough to chew, but workers were furious. Strikes, union demands and mass protests shook the country. Conditions were so bad that a 1909 survey showed kids were actually shorter and weaker than their parents thanks to malnutrition and pollution. If you were poor in Edwardian England, life was less Downton Abbey and more Dark Souls. But while workers fought for bread, women were demanding something even bigger: their rights. Number 7. Suffragette chaos. The suffragettes were basically the feminist avengers of Edwardian England. They didn't politely ask for the vote. They smashed windows, chained themselves to railings, set fire to postboxes, even threw themselves in front of racehorses. Emily Davison became infamous when she was killed in the 1913 Derby struck by the King's horse. The government fought back by force-feeding hunger-striking suffragettes in prison, a brutal tactic that shocked the nation. By the time World War I broke out, the suffragettes had made women's rights an unavoidable issue in British life. But while women clashed with the state, men were staring across the channel at something far more dangerous. Number 6. Europe's powder keg. The early 1900s weren't just about protests and royal scandals. Europe itself was a powder keg. Alliances, rivalries and an arms race meant every country was flexing its military like it was just waiting for a fight. Germany built battleships, France sharpened bayonets, and Britain drank cocoa wine and pretended the empire was still golden. Beneath the elegance of the Edwardian age, the continent braced for disaster. And when the spark came in 1914, England was dragged into the deadliest war it had ever seen. But before that, Britain enjoyed one last cultural glow-up. Number 5. The Edwardian glow-up. The Edwardian era was short, but it had a vibe. Feathered hats, the size of satellite dishes, Rolls-Royces cruising down London streets, and dinner parties with more forks than Gordon Ramsay could handle. This was Belle Epoque England, high society living like the Kardashians with yachts and champagne fountains. But the glitter was surface deep. Most of the population still lived in slums, kids worked in factories, and diseases like cholera hadn't disappeared. And then, just as the good times peaked, disaster struck at sea. Number 4. The Titanic sinks. If the Edwardian age had a mascot, it was the Titanic. Massive, glamorous, and doomed. When the unsinkable ship went down in 1912, it wasn't just a maritime tragedy, it was a national embarrassment. Thousands died because lifeboats were considered too ugly for the deck. For the rich, it was a scandal. For the poor, proof the wealthy literally had a better chance of survival. And for Britain as a whole, it was a warning. Maybe it wasn't as invincible as it thought, but the iceberg was only the beginning of the storm. Number 3. The Great War. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand ignited Europe, and Britain dove into the Great War. Nearly 1 million British soldiers died. An entire generation of young men was wiped out in the trenches. At home, rationing, air raids, and endless casualty lists crushed morale. The glittering Edwardian age vanished overnight. Blackout curtains and gas masks became the new reality. By 1918, Britain had won, but the victory came with a hangover that would haunt the nation for decades. And just when people thought it couldn't get worse, nature hit back harder. Number 2. The Spanish Flu. Soldiers returned from war only to bring home a new killer, influenza. The Spanish flu ripped through Britain, killing more people worldwide than the war itself. Hospitals overflowed, coffins piled up, and public gatherings were banned. For many families, surviving the war only to lose loved ones to the flu felt like a cruel joke. By 1919, the Edwardian dream was gone, and Britain was left traumatized, exhausted, and broke. But even in the rubble, something new was taking shape. Number 1. A new monarchy, a fading empire. After Victoria, the monarchy went from an untouchable goddess queen to something more human. Edward VII was followed by George V, who guided Britain through war and pandemic. Meanwhile, the empire itself was cracking. Ireland moved toward independence, colonies demanded more say, and Britain's claim to rule the world looked increasingly hollow. Queen Victoria's death had marked the end of an illusion, and what followed was the messy birth of the modern world. So in just 2 decades, Britain went from corsets and empire pride to trenches, ration books, and collapsing colonies. Now I want to hear from you. Would you rather party with Edward VII, march with the Suffragettes, or survive the trenches of World War I? Drop your choice in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into history, you'll love this wild look back at the Victorian era.